Hey folks, this is Captain Jones here to talk to you about the course administration for EE375. Just a quick note, if you are not enrolled in EE375 at the United States Military Academy, you can totally disregard this video. All we're going to do is talk about the actual kind of policies that I'm going to use in this course to administrate. So that primarily means we're going to talk about our grading policy, particularly because the way we're approaching this class is a little unique. But additionally, we're going to talk about how I'm going to handle late work, missed classes, and particularly the collaboration policy. All right. So grading, I kind of feel like is the one that's is going to answer a lot of questions. So I'm going to introduce that by way of kind of an example. You can see here. I'm going to assume that I've got sort of a fake set of lessons for a course like ours that's administered in the same fashion. So sort of a fake Unit 1 composed of 10 lessons, and a fake Unit 2 also composed of 10 lessons. And you can see that the format for each is basically the same. Each unit has 6 total lessons, 1A through 1F or 2A through 2F. Each unit, fake unit, has a lab requirement, and then each fake unit has 2 should-do lessons each and an aspire-to-do lesson. And so to start with for grading, the basic crux is that if you complete all of the must-do lessons, that's 80% in this course, okay? That is the bare minimum that I feel like you can learn and still be able to say you took a computer architecture course. If you do all the must-dos and all the should-do lessons, that bumps you up to a 90%. And if you do all the material in the course, that's 100%. Let's see. So here's an example. I'll jump down to the examples real quick. So in this first example here is an example of just that. I've got a student that completed all the must-do lessons all on time, and that's a flat 80% in the course. They got their go. So good on them. In this next example, I want to show you a student who did all the required lessons and then some portion of the should-dos and aspire-to-dos. And so this demonstrates 2 things. Number one, the lessons, all of them are effectively prorated. Okay, so this student's going to earn some amount of credit for these should-dos and these aspire-to-dos based on how many percentage points they're worth, even though they didn't quite complete all of them. If I go back up to the top here, okay, here's kind of how I might calculate that. All of my required lessons in total is worth 80%, and the only other thing you need to know are that the labs are worth twice as much as the lessons themselves. So if I've got 6 lessons in each unit, that's a total of 12 lessons. The labs are worth twice as much, so 12 plus 2 is 14 plus 2 is 16. I effectively have 16 kind of like units in my must-do section here. So if I take 80% and divide by 16, that's going to tell me how many percentage points each must-do lesson are worth. That's 5%. And the labs are twice as much, so they're worth 10% each. I've got 4 should-do lessons across the entire course, and altogether they're worth 10%. 10 divided by 4 is 2.5%, so each should-do lesson is worth 2.5% each. And I've got 2 aspire-to-dos. 2 aspire-to-do lessons over the course of 10% is 5% each for these aspire-to-do lessons. So if we come back here to this example, my student that's done all but 1 should-do and all but 1 aspire-to-do lesson has earned themselves 80% for all the must-do lessons. They've earned themselves 7.5% for these 3 should-dos. That's 3 times 2.5. And another 5% for this aspire-to-do lesson. So all told, if I'm doing my math right, that means this student earned a 92.5% in the class. All right. The second thing this shows is actually probably best demonstrated with this example here. And so in this example, I've got a student who did all their must-do lessons. I've got 1 lab here, though, that's kind of shaded a little more dull than the rest, and that's to indicate that it was turned in late. So I've got a late lab. They did 3 of the should-dos and 2 aspire-to-dos. All right. And the comment that I wanted to make above that actually I feel like is better exemplified down here is to show that even though this student did an aspire-to-do lesson here labeled 2I, they're not going to get credit for it. And that's why there's a red X through here. The reason is because they didn't complete all the should-do lessons for this unit. I've done my level best to make sure that the must-do lessons are truly the required material, that the should-do lessons are sort of the very next thing that I want students to learn, and the aspire-to-dos are kind of like the nice-to-knows. So to incentivize that, I'm only going to give credit for aspire-to-do lessons if all of the other lessons are complete. We're only going to get lessons, I don't have an example for it here, we're only going to get credit for the should-do lessons if all of the must-dos are complete, okay? So in this case, the last thing we need to know to calculate the score is that lessons, must-do lessons, are allowed to be turned in late. They're allowed to be turned in up to the last day of class. So you get the whole semester basically to work on all of your must-do lessons. And that's because I want you to finish these. Again, these are the required portions of this course. But to incentivize them getting turned in on time, if a must-do lesson is turned in late, it's going to be worth half what it would have been. Okay, so in this case, I've got a student who turned in all 12 lessons on time. 5% times 12 lessons is how much they earned from those. The labs, however, they were worth 10%, but one of them was turned in late. So instead of these being sort of worth, instead of there being 2 lessons turned in on time times 10%, one of them is half as much. So I've only got 1.5 sort of times the 10% that each lab is worth. Additionally, I've got still 3 times 2.5% for these should do lessons. And again, one of these aspire to do lessons doesn't count, so I've got one valid aspire to do lesson 1 times 5. If I'm doing my math right, that means this student earned an 87.5% based on their coursework. And I want to make a note that this is necessarily represent an oversight. Okay, hopefully the student knew going into this aspire to do lesson right here that they hadn't completed all the should do's and they weren't necessarily going to get credit for it. But maybe that's an intentional choice. It might be that this student was not super interested in whatever this should do lesson is and was very interested in this aspire to do lesson. And if that's the case, then good on them to be able to sort of prioritize their learning, to do the things that they were curious in. So don't necessarily let the fact that you need to do the should do's in order to get credit for the aspire to do's keep you from doing these lessons if you are interested in them. Okay, you just need to know going in that it's for sort of a pure educational endeavor at that point. Okay. In my last lesson or example here, I've got a student who completed all the lessons, but you'll notice Lab 1 was turned in late, Lesson 2F was turned in late, and here Lesson 2H was turned in late. So just like before for the must-dos, okay, Lab 1 and 2F, they still get their credit, but it's half as much. So I've got 5 percentage points times, not 12 lessons, but 11.5 lessons. Because this 2F was turned in late. I've got 10 points for my labs times 1.5 because I've got one lab that got turned in late. And then for my should do's, I'm only crediting 3. That's because I'm not going to take should do lessons late. Those to me are kind of nice to haves. So those need to be on time, and I don't necessarily want to be like grading the whole course right up to the last minute. Okay, if things are late, I want to give you credit for the must-dos because that's kind of the requirement. That's what you need to effectively to pass the class. But if you're going to do a should do or an aspire to do, those have to be turned in on time effectively. So because this should do lesson was turned in late, it's not credited, and neither is this aspire to do lesson, even though it was turned in on time. But by virtue of the fact that this was turned in late, no credit here as well. So if I'm doing my math right, that person, this student's earning an 85% in the course because these 2 lessons don't count and these 2 were turned in late. This brings up an interesting point, which is you'll notice up here that even though the Lab 1 was turned in late, I'm still going to give credit for these lessons up here, these should do's and these aspire to do's, and that's because specifically they were turned in on time. Okay, so and effectively the should do's and the aspire to do's, as long as they're turned in on time, credit will be awarded sort of retroactively if you happen to be a little late on the must do's. That I'll acknowledge that. But like I said, I don't want to be grading should do's and aspire to do's all the way to the end of class, so they have to be on time if they're going to be credited at all. All right. So you can see I've got some purple numbers. The basic process kind of for figuring out your grade in this course, right, is to just sort of start by totaling up all the must-dos, all the should-dos, all the aspire-to-dos, and sort of carving them out from 80%, 90%, and 100% to figure out what each one's worth. Making sure to count the labs double. And then number 2, you'll kind of go through, if you're doing this for yourself, cross-out any lessons that you may have done that don't count. Which include lessons like aspire duties that were completed when not all the should do's were done, or when if a should do happened to have turned in late. And then lastly, You'll calculate up your final score, cutting them sort of the must-do lessons in half if any of them were turned in late. All right. I've mentioned kind of on time and late a couple of times, so let's talk about what that means. Because there's effectively two different due dates potentially for a unit. So here I've got a fake calendar here. It's May from this year. We're going to assume that May 12th was the last class that we do for our first fake unit. And after that, we start Unit 2, and that May 27th here is just hypothetically the last date for our Unit 2, okay? So May 12th is the last date for Unit 1. That's when all of the lessons for that unit are due. That's probably the day that we're going to start the lab, and I'm going to expect kind of everybody to have done a minimum, the must-do lessons at that point for the lab to kind of even make sense. So all lessons are due at the end of that class on May 12th, which is the last day for that unit, and anything after that's considered late. Now, since we're starting the lab on that day, I want to give you some time to work on it, which means you'll have up until the last class for the next unit to complete that lab. So here you can see this is the last hypothetical class date for fake Unit 2. All the Unit 2 lessons will be due on that date, and then that's also the due date for the lab. So down here where this individual may have turned in their lab 1, it was turned in late. Late means that got turned in after class on the 27th. Down here, I've got a student who turned in Lab 1 and Lesson 2F late. Lab 1 late means he got turned in after the 27th, because that was the first unit. Lesson 2F was late because it also was turned in after this date. That because it was the lesson for Unit 2, it had to have been in on this date, because that's the last date for Unit 2. All right. Okay, so the last thing I want to say about the lessons is based on my current count, you will be on pace, meaning you'll be complete with all the required stuff if you can complete 1.75 lessons per class. Lessons being the lessons kind of on the website, right? A video, must-do exercise, and that sort of thing. So roughly two lessons per class is what you kind of a pace you want to keep. If you want to do everything in the class, you need to average about 3 lessons complete per class. So keep those numbers in mind. At least right now, the way I'm planning the course, that's kind of the pace you need to keep. Okay, and let's take a sec real quick. I'm going to pull up the course calendar to look at some actual dates here. Okay. All right, so this says we meet 30 times. I've got 30 classes here based on the current calendar for AY 23-1. You can see here kind of the tentative projections for us working on each unit. So the first sort of 5, or really 6 times we meet, we'll work on units 0 and 1, and that 6th time we meet on tentatively Tuesday, September 6th is when we'll start Lab 1. Again, that's when all the Unit 0 and Unit 1 lessons are due. The next time we meet, we'll start Unit 2. Tentatively on September 20th is when we'll do our second lab in class. That's when the Unit 2 lessons are due and the first lab is due. And the only other thing I'll point out is down here, the last time we meet is when we'll do Lab 6. I'm planning on there being a lab, and I'll take that, even though we won't meet, that'll be due on the last day of classes, about a little over a week later. And then you can also kind of see a note here, at least for this term, I've got potentially jury duty this week. If that's the case, I'm going to expect everyone still to show up to class, to work together. If you miss a class, it's totally fine, honestly. I'd like a heads up if you would. But since all the material's online, you can keep working on the class, even if you have to miss one or multiple class days. All right. Okay. The last note I want to give you about grading down here in pink is that there's a big caveat to all this, which is if partway through the semester it seems like this is not working, then I'm gonna adjust it. But I think it'll only ever be in your favor. So for instance, one big question I've got is whether the workload I've assigned is even feasible. It might be that we get into fake units 1 and 2 here, and the most anyone's able to do are the first 4 lessons of each unit. Okay, well if that's the case, of course I'm gonna scale things in your favor. I'll try to be very I'll make sure you all know when I'm doing that and how you can sort of recalculate your grade. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is collaboration, because again, this is a very collaborative course. So I want you to work with other students on the stuff in this course, including on your as much of the work as you're going to do in this course as possible, to so that you can lean on your classmates for help. So the only exception to this are the mastery checks. Those are individual checks. So those are going to be open note, open textbook, closed everything else, closed friend, closed internet. However, everything else in the course is open. So while you're working on your must-do exercises, while you're working in class, while you're doing some additional exercises, while you're working on the labs, those are open everything. Grab a student in your section, have them help you out, help them answer your questions, and work together to get to those solutions. All right, folks. I think I've talked long enough. That's all I got. If you've got any questions, we'll answer them in class. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.